Gathering Place. I'm Rachel Gerber, the editor of the Gathering Place website at www.thegatheringplace.us, and I'm also the denominational minister for youth and young adults for Mennonite Church USA. This month we have been talking about 21st century faith formation. How do we best connect and inform faith with this iGeneration moving forward? And so we are so thrilled to have Dave Csinos here with us today, the president and founder of Faith Forward, as he is going to talk with us about what does it mean to reimagine children and youth ministry in this 21st century. So Dave, welcome. We are so excited to have you here. And yeah, why don't you just go ahead, jump on in and get us started.
Sure. Well, to kind of get the lay of the land, we have a couple people here. We kind of were chatting earlier as before we officially began, but for those of you who are able to get your, mics and screens and everything working, and you're fully present here as technology allows, then if you could just kind of share your name and your role and kind of what you hope to get out of this webinar, then that kind of gives us a good base for how to move forward. So
I'll start. I'm Merle Hostetler from Goshen, Indiana, and I've been at East Goshen Mennonite for about 15 years, and I work a lot with the youth, but also am involved in most other aspects of ministry too. There's usually another pastor on board with us, so we're in transition right now, so there's a transitional pastor with us. But I hope to get out of this just some ideas for youth ministry today that I'm always open to trying some new things. I think traditional ministry is good, but I'm always looking to see if there's other things that can plug into where our kids are at today. So that's why I'm here.
Great, thanks.
Who's up next?
All right, I'll go. I'm Clayton Gladish. I'm one of the pastors at Heston Mennonite Church in Heston, Kansas. One of the parts of my role is working with youth and young adults and thinking about faith formation throughout the generations. We're all pretty passionate about that here, but it falls definitely into my job description, if such a thing dictates what I do or don't do, as if that was inclusive of everything that happens. But yeah, what I'm hoping to get out of this is just as always, always looking for new ideas, new insights into how we can better pass on our faith and make faith something that is meaningful and powerful in the lives of young people as they are being formed, whether they know it or not, by the things around them. I'm hoping that Christ is a big part of that formation.
Great. Thank you.
We just want to jump in here and say that we've got Amy up on the phone or kind of joining us too virtually. She said she can hear, she just can't get her mic to work. So she's a pastor in Seattle working in both family and youth as well as in worship. So welcome, Amy.
Great.
I can go next. My name is John Tyson, and I am pastor of Faith Formation at Bethel College Mennonite Church in North Newton, Kansas. So I do generally faith formation for children all the way up through young adults, and I'm just hoping to get some new ideas, and especially in relation to how we do faith formation and a culture and a church culture where attendance is very infrequent.
Yeah.
That's where I'm coming from.
Cool. All right, and I think Daniel, you're the last one.
Am I the last?
Yeah. So we're just kind of sharing. I think you came a little later. So names, your name, your role, and what you kind of hope to get out of this time.
Okay. Yeah, having computer issues, so I'm doing this on my phone, so we'll see how this works.
Okay.
Daniel Yoder. I'm one of the pastors of Christian Formation at College Mennonite in Goshen, Indiana, so just a couple miles from Merle right now. But yeah, we're trying to find ways of working with parents more and doing formation with parents as a way of working at youth and children's ministry. And so my wife she's in the role of working with children and families, and then I'm working with youth and families.
Okay.
And so,
Cool.
so yeah, just wanted to get more information and hear more about that. Yeah, I've also been to so far all the Faith Forward conferences and
That's
events.
right.
So, so I'm glad that you're here speaking with the Mennonites officially now. So, so
That's right.
yeah.
Great. Thanks.
Yep.
And just for the sake of recording, sorry, if you can mute your microphone, then it kind of speeds up, I guess, I don't know, lets us use more bandwidth better or something. And I think, yeah, Rachel kind of mentioned that earlier about we're going to have time at the end for questions. And we're actually going to have a big chunk of time for questions because, and Rachel will field those. But the reason I like lots of time for questions is because I feel like that's where we get to kind of the real heart of what some of you are saying in terms of like looking for new ideas and practices and things like that. So my context is not radically different, but somewhat different. I am in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and just working on hopefully what is to be near the end of my PhD from the University of Toronto, focusing on children and interculturalism. So being out here, there's not a huge Anabaptist Mennonite network, and by not huge, I mean I think no one. So my wife is working at a Baptist church here, which, you know, loosely saying some would argue Anabaptist because they you know, do adult baptism, but we know better, I think. So I'm going to kind of share some bigger ideas about children's and youth ministry, and then we'll have some time for questions and focus more on some of the practices and some of the more practical ideas that we can bring to our context, because we're all in somewhat different contexts. So first of all, I know that the gathering place is more of a youth thing, and my area tends to be more children, but with Faith Forward, we actually try to break down the silo between children's and youth ministry, and so that's kind of one of the things that makes Faith Forward unique. Is there's a lot of youth ministry events out there, there's a lot of children's ministry events out there, and so when we got the idea of doing this progressive, innovative event, we thought, well, let's bring them together so that we are cross-pollinating one another and developing a community that goes bigger, that is bigger than just children's leaders and youth leaders. So that's kind of that dual focus of children's ministry and youth ministry is something I'm going to bring to this conversation today. One of the things that has been really great about kind of where I am in finishing school and moving around a little bit is that I get to travel and speak at a lot of different events. And earlier in the year, I was in Australia speaking at a National Children's and Family Ministry event there. And then that was in Sydney, and then I had to get to Melbourne. And so someone said, well, why don't I'll just take you on a road trip. I've got a little bit of time off, and we'll kind of go along the coast rather than just fly right to Melbourne. And we stayed at these, I don't know, we stayed at this really kind of side-of-the-road hotel one night. And then he's like, well, I have a friend of a friend who they sold their business in Melbourne, and they moved to this kind of hobby farm, and they're hippies, and they grow their own chickens and all their own food. And I mean, so we stayed there one night, and we were sharing stories one time over dinner, and they got talking about someone who had stayed with them on like a work exchange, and they were from another part of Australia. and while this guy was with them, they had this snake that was kind of tormenting some of their chickens. And the first thing I learned about the state of Victoria in Australia is that every snake in the state of Victoria is poisonous. So don't go near one thinking it might not be poisonous. So they had this snake that was tormenting their chickens, and this guy from the other part of Australia knew how to catch them and what to do with them. So he was able to catch it, and he killed it. And he said, back home, we would actually kind of skin it and prepare it, and we'd eat it. So they thought, being kind of hippies, they're like, well, let's do it. It's part of the hippie checklist. Eat snakes when you have the ability to. So the guy cut the head off of the snake and was starting to skin it, and as he was doing that, the body of the snake actually came around and struck him, kind of like how when you kill a fish, it keeps moving. So the head was gone. So sometimes people are like, did the guy die? No, because there was no venom there, so he was fine. But the thing is, there was so much muscle memory in the body of the snake that the body itself, even without a head, knew that it was being threatened, and it needed to respond the only way it knew how. And I think a lot of us in children's and youth ministry are like the snake. And when things change, we have been so accustomed to responding to things the same way over and over again that even when our heads might be cut off, we just keep kind of doing what we've always done. And the motto of the church in North America is, well, that's the way we've always done it. So we need to recognize that things have changed. And I mean, we were talking at the beginning about 21st century faith formation, and I feel like even to say 21st century faith formation is, I mean, we've been saying that for 15 years, and what a 15 years it's been in this century, because so much has changed. And we need to respond to these changes in drastic ways. And to begin kind of this deep-rooted change, we have to look at the foundations of where we're building our houses. We need to rethink what exactly is it that we're doing with kids and youth, and why these things matter in the first place. And then once we've done that, then we can start to think about, okay, if this is what we believe about why we're doing what we're doing and why it matters and what we hope to get out of this, then we can start thinking about, well, what are the practices that will actually help us reach those goals and kind of put that vision into fruition. So that's what I want to do for the next little bit. So I've been involved in ministry with young people in all sorts of different churches and organizations, and wherever I've been, whatever kind of denomination it is, one of the kind of typical questions I often get asked, whether it's from parents or ministry leaders, is essentially, where are the children? They're not coming anymore, and they want to know how to get kids into the church. So it's a question I'm sure many of you have heard from parents. Maybe some of you have asked it yourself. I know I have often throughout the years I've been involved in ministry. But sometimes when I step back from that question, I think, is this really the most important question we should be asking? I feel like some churches become so intent on creating programs for children and youth, and these programs provide undergirding for other congregational ministries. And really, it becomes a way for the church to become attractive to families. I was a children's pastor for a number of years, and that was really one of the things that we were trying to do. Yeah, we wanted to create programs that served our community, but also by doing so, we were showcasing who we were as a congregation. And for some people in the congregation, it was a chance to get families into the church. So it was this attractional model of children's and youth ministry. And essentially, you want to be more attractive than the church down the street. When this happens, though, I think congregations lose what it means to really be involved in ministry with young people, because our assumptions aren't guided by questions like, are young people becoming better disciples of Jesus? It's really, the question is more, do the kids and teens and their parents, which some people say even are more important, do they like it enough to come back week after week? But things haven't always been this way, and I think sometimes we look back to the glory days of Sunday school and youth group when classrooms were full of children and youth, and wonder, why isn't it this way anymore? Now, Daniel mentioned he has been to all the Faith Forward events, and back when we were starting out as a one-time event, we called it Children, Youth, and a New Kind of Christianity, which was a huge mouthful, but for what was supposed to be a one-time event was really obvious that this is what we're about, so no tagline needed. And we had that event at Calvary Baptist Church in Washington, D.C., and the exhibit hall was in their Christian education, or their Sunday school wing, that was built around 100 years ago, probably a little more than that. And it was this octagonal room with these, like a balcony that went all the way around the room, and a center part on the main floor that this was pretty typical of the time of what Sunday school would look like and how space was built to make Sunday school functional. So there's so many people in Sunday school that they built this space. And how it would work is you know, the days pre-webinar and, you know, new videos and stuff like that, they would have a person in the middle doing essential teaching and all the different classes up on the top. And then what would happen is they would close these partitions between these different classrooms at the top and have individual classes. So they built it because they had, like many churches of their time, they needed the space to do Sunday school because they had lots of people. And like a lot of churches now, they don't use the space the same way, and so they use the space now, as many of you might guess, for storage. I mean, they use it for other things too, but they do store their children there. No, they don't. So that's kind of, you know, we have these spaces in our churches that we look back to and we think, remember the days when they were packed. Why are things changing? Where have all the young people gone? But the assumptions and the approaches to children's and youth ministry that we hold to today, if we're honest with ourselves, they're really new phenomena, because most of what counts as formational endeavors with young people didn't even exist for most of the history of the church. Like the staples, even the things we look back to as, and we might not do anymore, but like Sunday school and midweek programs and youth groups and outreach events, these things didn't exist for most of the history of the church. But what happened is sometime in the late 20th century, the importance of church growth was kind of touted by really well-known ministry leaders and speakers, and youth and children's programs became ways to help churches grow, and keeping teens and children and adults separate became kind of the order of the day. Now, there were good intentions, of course. So what happened is early in the 20th century, churches were really becoming enthralled with changes to secular education and really big revolutionary ideas that were changing the way young people were educated in schools. And Christian educators began to think about these ideas and thought, well, why can't we translate them into congregational religious education? And so what happened is you have this formal schooling instructional model of children's religious education, where, you know, it put the school in Sunday school. And things were working for a while, and huge national conferences were being held in the 40s and the 50s, where Sunday school teachers and youth group leaders would travel, and we're talking volunteers here, would, you know, take a weekend or a week of their time and go and learn how to become a better Sunday school teacher or a better youth leader. But what happened is, through the 70s and the 80s, the baby boomer generation was coming of age and having kids of their own. And I know a lot right now, oh, well, it's all of the baby boomers did this and the baby boomers did that. We know it's not, for any boomers there, we know it's not your fault. But what happened is we had this generation that was changing the world and the way that people saw themselves in the world. And this meant that they had different ideas about what church involvement meant. For one thing, there wasn't so much of a willingness for people to commit to teaching each and every Sunday, and so people didn't see as much point to investing themselves in large doses of time for teacher training. And so Sunday school ended up, and youth group ended up having this rotating door of teachers that came and went and often were kind of minimally trained. from my experience, I feel like with youth groups, with teens, it didn't happen so much with the because it functions a little differently often in congregations, but the trend was still going on. And for, I think, another thing, and more importantly, is that people started to treat youth and children's ministry like violin lessons. And what I mean by that is, essentially, when I was in grade 8, I grew up Catholic, and I went to Catholic school, and so our whole class did their confirmation together in grade 8, partnering with the parish that sponsored our school. And one of my classmates played the violin at our confirmation ceremony. I didn't know he could play the violin, and I loved it, and I thought, I want to learn to play the violin. So my parents kind of made a couple calls and got me into local violin lessons, and they had no choice because I was dead set at playing the violin, and they didn't know how. So they had to pay a professional to teach me how to do this. And this is essentially kind of what's happened with congregational ministry with young people. There's this growing willingness for people to pay for things to be done for them and for their children. So parents could think, if they could fork over money for people to teach their kids how to play the violin, why couldn't they do the same to pay professionals to teach their children to be Christian? And it's not that this is not that there were bad intentions here. The intentions were incredibly good. There are professionals who can do it better than we can do it. So the church staff position of the children's pastor and the youth pastor took off, and ministry with teens became much more professionalized. But what was happening is there was still often this schooling instructional model happening, and often continuing to happen today. So Sunday school and youth group, these kind of programs still were the main venue for what happened. How now a professional group of people would engage in formation with young people. But we might say it's Sunday school, but ministry really isn't about school. We might form different programs and youth groups and get people into church through these programs, but children's youth ministry isn't really about this kind of stuff that we do. We might pack the kids into the rafters, and we might see numerical success in our programs, but numerical success in these programs doesn't actually mean that the people who are there are being spiritually formed. If any of you are familiar with Willow Creek, they did a study, I guess 8 or 9 years ago now, and they released the results in a booklet called Reveal. It's really fascinating because everyone looked to Willow Creek in the 80s and the 90s for this kind of megachurch model of what it means to do church, and they were operating under this assumption that the more involved people were in their programming, the more those people were being spiritually formed. But what they actually learned through this huge study they did is that the most involved people were actually the people who were experiencing the least formation. They were stagnant in their faith. They had this trajectory of different stages of faith that they came up with, and it didn't matter where people were on those stages. The most involved people were just kind of stuck. So it's not these kind of the what that we do with young people isn't really what ministry with them is all about. It's really about ministry. And as I was thinking about this, I thought, well, I'm going to look up what ministry is, and I went to a small theological dictionary that my wife was given when she started seminary, and it's called Crazy Talk, and it says it's a not-so-stuffy guide to theological terms, and it tries to put humor into a theological dictionary, which I think is pretty impossible, but they gave it a good shot. And so this is how they define ministry. They say that ministry is an office instituted by God for work in God's world, the holders of which often spend too much time in their offices. With an unfortunate assonance with misery, the office of ministry was instituted by God for the alleviation of misery, but unfortunately it sometimes causes it. The purpose of the office is to minister to the needs of others, to love, save, and bless the world. Sadly, the temptation is for holders of the office to see first to the needs of the office, but here is the incredibly good news. God has chosen to use sinners in order to love, save, and bless the world. And then I think they end with the most important part. This means that we are all qualified for ministry. Now, other definitions of ministry use the word service a lot. And so ministry can mean service that people perform for the betterment of others. Ministry exists to help people form and develop and live healthy, flourishing lives. So theological dictionaries may say that ministry is a noun, but really it's a verb. It's something that we do. It's about ministering, about action for the betterment of others. So then children's and youth ministry isn't really about building programs or having the coolest youth group in town. Sorry about the two of you in Goshen. You can argue about whose is cooler than the other. But it's and it's not about how parents providing a place where parents can come to church uninterrupted. Really, it's about serving young people. It's about caring for them and forming them into people who serve one another and serve the world in the way of Jesus, because this is what Jesus' ministry was about. Now, there is certainly room in this understanding of ministry for the what that we do, the kind of activities and the programs that we do, but we run into problems when the programs or the what that we do comes to trump the why we do it in the first place. And the reason that we do it is to help young people live flourishing lives. So children's and youth ministry is about service and not programming. But I think sometimes even this simple notion can become problematic because in our contemporary consumer-based society, young people can sometimes be seen as the consumers of ministry, the ones who are on the receiving end of ministry. Notions of ministry to young people or for young people can kind of showcase this view because they're both kind of passive words. When we talk about ministry to teens or ministry for youth, there's someone who's doing the ministering and someone who's being ministered to. So churches, however, some churches are joining others and using the term with, ministry with children, ministry with youth. And this involves serving them and being served by them and serving alongside them. So the adult serves, the teen serves, the child serves, and ministry happens when young and old come together to serve one another. So really, children's and youth ministry then is anything and everything we do to serve kids and teens as they walk on the spiritual journey. But there's still one more piece of this that we should probably cover, because the sort of service we do with young people is carried out in a particular context, and that context is communities of faith. It happens within congregations and within families who are trying to live their faith together and are forming one another in faith as they do so. So children's youth ministry not only exists to serve young people just on a broader journey of faith, but also to help them be formed as followers of Jesus within the community. So the idea of formation affirms children and teens as whole spiritual persons. So they don't have to learn certain things or reach a certain age level because they already are spiritual beings. And this is something I feel like youth leaders of course they are, you can tell just by talking with them. I think this is more something that is more difficult with more of a struggle with children's ministry, because there's often this sense that, oh, they don't know what they're talking about. Isn't that cute? They made a funny joke, and really it wasn't a joke. It was a spiritual idea that they were expressing, and we didn't have the ears to hear it for what it was. So I feel like with some of what I'm saying, I'm talking to the choir, and that's totally good, because what I'm trying to do is kind of help us kind of step back from the what we're doing and think about the why we're doing it. So this idea of formation. John Westerhoff wrote an important book in 1974 called Will Our Children Have Faith? And in it, he defines formation as an intentional effort to engage in enculturization, which is that natural process by which culture, which is people's understandings, people's ways of life, their worldview, and their ethos, they're transmitted from one generation to another. That's what formation is. He believes that formation occurs through participation and practice in a community's way of life. So Christian formation then is about forming disciples of Jesus, people who participate and practice the way of Jesus within communities of disciples. It's about helping people more closely follow the path that Jesus showed us to live through his words and his actions, and building this journey into the core of their identities. So children and youth, like adults, can be followers of Jesus. There are no age restrictions, as I said. and there's no like wooden cardboard cutout of Jesus holding up his hand that says you have to be this high to follow me. You don't have to. The good news is you don't have to pass a standardized test. I think I probably wouldn't pass anyway if I did. When Jesus called his first disciples to him, he didn't tell them to go study a book or come back when they're older. He said, the Bible says that as Jesus walked alongside the Galilee Sea, he saw two brothers, Simon, who was called Peter, and Andrew, throwing fishing nets into the sea because they were fishermen. Come, follow me, he said, and I will show you how to fish for people. And they left their nets behind and became apprentices in the Jesus way. They took their first steps on the journey of discipleship. And so when we think about what it means to reimagine children's and youth ministry in the way of Jesus, the focus shifts to spiritual formation, to helping young people become formed as disciples of Jesus. And I think what are the great things about this is it opens wide the gates of creativity, that suddenly if this is what it means to do ministry with young people, then the restrictions come off and we don't have to live by the church motto of that's the way we've always done it. We become free to rethink what we're doing and free to creatively experiment with new ideas, because now we have a grounded vision as to what it is that we're doing, and is what we're doing helping fulfill this vision of helping young people live as followers of Jesus. So those are kind of the ideas I wanted to share, and I know we have just over 20 minutes, I think, left. And I wanted to spend a lot of time kind of hearing from some of you, some questions that you might have, and start to think about, so what does this kind of mean in our contexts, and what kind of ideas and practices. One of the things that, a lot of the things that I shared actually come from the beginning of the book that I wrote with Ivy Beckwith called Children's Ministry in the Way of Jesus. And that's from like the first chapter or two, but then we spend the next 10 or so chapters talking about different ideas, and I didn't want to bore you by just going through all of those, but we talk about what does that mean to have young people engage with story or be part of communities of faith as full participants, and what does it mean for young people to engage in social justice and not just be the recipients of what we as a church do to engage in social justice issues, but also to be at the forefront of these initiatives. And so we talk about all sorts of different practices, and instead of just kind of running through them really quick, I'd rather hear kind of what interests you and what kind of practices you guys are trying or interested in trying out. So I think Rachel's going to field the questions. If you type them out, she will then kind of let me know where we'll go.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Dave. That was really fascinating to sort of hear the history of how the spiritual formation sort of beginning origins of Sunday school, how that all got started. So the floor is open to all of you. It seems like we are actually a small enough group. If you would like to just unmute and ask a question to Dave directly, that's fine. Or if someone's talking in the midst of it and you have an idea that you want to get out, feel free to put it on the group chat section, which is off to the right. And if it's not showing up on your screen, just take your cursor, hover it over to the top left, and you'll see a little blue blurb that says chat, and that will open up your chat feature. So feel free to unmute your microphone if you have a specific question for Dave. And if not, I've got lots. So I'm going to let you all in first. Who wants to get us started? All right, well, I'll get you started with the first question while you're all thinking. Unless Daniel, you look like you're ready to talk. Are you ready to talk? Trying to unmute? No. Okay. Dave, why don't you give us a few suggestions maybe of what is a good place to get started in thinking creatively and experimenting with. Seems like really evoking the imagination of your congregation to see that everyone really is former of faith. And so I guess I have two questions. One is, how do you, for lack of a better term, convince your congregation to see that they all are a part of this process, that is just not one of a few? Because I think that is a big paradigm shift, that we are needing to change. And also, what are some ways then you can invite this intergenerational faith formation to happen?
Yeah. Great questions. I was hoping we would kind of get onto this topic as well, because I know from what some of you said, you hope to get out of it at the beginning, this idea of kind of all ages and intergenerational stuff came about. I should say, first of all, that I know that have any of you also noticed that intergenerational is kind of becoming more of a buzzword in children's and youth ministry? I think it's very unfortunate that it's more so in children's and youth ministry and not in ministry for adults, because it kind of gives the assumption that it's intergenerational is good for young people, but adults can take it or leave it as they choose. I think the thing about intergenerational ministry is it's more radical than we realize, because we live in a society that segregates based on ages. And really, there's a reason for that, and it has to do with purchasing power. If we can separate people into different small age groups, then more things have to be consumed. We have to buy more, because a toy might not be good for, if we have a toy that's good for ages 3 to 13, then you need to buy it. You can buy it when you're 3 and not have to buy an updated version for 10 years. But when we separate ages, separate young people into ages, then they grow out of things and new things have to be purchased. And I'm being a little cynical here, but as I was saying before we started the recording, you can't have cynicism without Csinos, which is my last name. So there you go. So this idea of breaking down the walls between ages is much more radical than we realize, because it's really about almost like doing some sort of intercultural ministry as well. Because if you look at each generation as a culture, then when you put them together in a different room, or in the same room, and not just in the same room, but in the same conversation or the same activity, then it means we're all going to get uncomfortable in different ways, because our norms are not going to be the same norms, and our expectations aren't going to be the same expectations that other people of different generations are bringing to that event. So that being said, one of the things that I think we can really do is, really I learned this from my wife. So a year ago, she started ministering at a Baptist church here in Halifax that is the most theologically progressive Baptist church in the country, but one of the most liturgically traditional Baptist churches as well. And you walk into it and you think you're in an Episcopal or an Anglican church based on their liturgy. And they have a children's story time, where all the kids come up to the front before the sermon and often before they go to Sunday school, which is a pretty common practice. And what she has been trying to do, not every week, but sometimes, is she uses that time to actually subvert that very practice that she's engaging in. So the first week she was there, she started it it was the lectionary text for the week was about Peter saying to Jesus, "How many times do I forgive? 7 or 70 times, 7 times, is that good enough?" And Jesus says, not 7, but 70 times 7. And so she thought, well, let's look at what 70 times 7 means. So she bought Post-it note stars and had the children just go all over the church, mainly on the main aisle, and stick these stars all over the floor. And what happened is, it was also Communion Sunday, so people were coming up for communion and doing, there was a little bit of other movement, and the stars got stuck to people's, Post-it notes are not made to stick on carpet, so they got stuck on people's shoes, and it became this big metaphor that whether we know it or not, we carry forgiveness with us into the world. And she took this time that is often just, okay, kids, come on up, and adults, you can kind of tune out, and she made it this time where everyone was engaged. And she tries to do these kind of creative things to, rather than talking about the importance of intergenerational or the importance of thinking creatively, she actually models it to the point where at one meeting, the board actually said, we should probably change the name of what this time is. We don't know what it should be called because it's certainly not a children's story anymore. It's for everyone, and we love it. Still haven't kind of nailed down what that new name is going to be, because we just can't figure out what that should be. So any ideas, we're open to them. And another thing that she did is at the beginning of the year, she had the children go to the center of the congregation and just said, okay, stand up if you are on the board, or stand up if you're a Sunday school teacher. And she kind of started with the obvious ones, like a youth group leader or a Sunday school teacher. And then eventually, there were just a handful of people left sitting down. And she said, now stand up if you pray for this congregation and pray for the people in this congregation. And so suddenly you have everyone standing up. And she said, if you're standing, you have a stake in the young people's lives here. And it was a very, it was a way of embodying that idea of this isn't a professionalized thing. This is something that we're all responsible for. So it's that I don't think necessarily we need to do new things and have an intergenerational event or something like that, but there are ways that we can kind of bring those elements into what we're doing. But it does become uncomfortable because I think we adults specifically are not used to that. We are not used to doing things that appeal to children and appeal to teens. And that's why I kind of think it's easier to slowly make that shift and almost convince people by having them experience it and appreciate it, rather than trying to kind of say, well, this is really important, can we do this? Let's just kind of gradually and in appropriate ways kind of subvert those practices that separate us to begin with. Does that kind of answer your question?
That's very helpful. Yeah. Amy has a question here talking about she's interested in supporting parents and families in their faith practices and conversations, interactions, what that looks like. How much of what we're doing is, in the families is not shaped by professionals, right? But I think our parents often feel that they're ill-equipped to know what to really do. So can you talk about how do you encourage, equip, support, resource parents in this journey?
Yeah, that's a great question.
And Amy, feel free I should also say, Amy, feel free to jump in if I did not represent the question accurately.
I think you're totally right that parents feel ill-equipped to do the kind of work on their own, and I don't think it's all their fault, because the church has become, it's more complex. It has to do with the professionalization. We've essentially in the church have told parents for a generation that, more than a generation, that you don't need to do it. We will take care of it. We're the ones with the VBS curriculum after all. So I think the biggest thing that I like to tell parents is that you already have everything you need. You don't have to go to a class. You don't have to study anything. You don't have to, I would say there are three big things, and this is really just from looking back on my own formation and hearing stories of other people in different workshops that I do. And there are three things I've kind of identified that have been kind of important in my formation and in some of the formative experiences of people in different events that I've done where I've heard people talk about them. And the first thing I think is that parents need to share their stories. And we all have our stories. We live and die by our stories. And these don't need to be the story of, the big mountaintop experience or some sort of great story of, when God used that parent or God spoke to that parent in a particular way. But we just need to tell our stories of those moments in our lives that help make us who we are, because God is still at work in those moments if we don't, even if at the time and even now we don't name them. But that was important when, for me growing up, I knew who I was because I could identify the stories that my parents told me about where I've come from, about my family, about them as children, about what mattered to them, and it made me think about the things that matter to me. That's the first thing. The second thing is, again, what parents already have. They're questions of faith. I feel like in ministry with young people, there's this importance of, there's a sense that we need to have the answers. They're going to ask us tough questions, and I feel like this is a big hang-up for parents, and I think parents don't realize it's also a huge hang-up for those of us who are in professional ministry with young people as well, because we certainly don't have all the answers. But young people start asking deep theological questions and deep questions about the world and their place within it, and it's okay that we don't have the answers. I think the bigger gift that we can give our children is sharing our questions with them, and not looking for answers, but really, hearing their questions and honoring their questions and sharing and modeling what it means to hold these questions in a way that acknowledges we may spend the rest of our lives looking for an answer and probably not find it, and that's okay. So stories and questions, and the third thing I think is our imaginations, and we can walk alongside our kids and our teens with showing them what it means to have an imagination for living as disciples of Jesus today. And I think that that's something where we can even take a step back, and parents can let their children lead them along that process as well. So really, that's kind of the advice that I tend to give to parents. You already have what you need. You have your stories, you have your questions, and you have your imaginations. And none of those things are any different than what your children have. So even just in very informal ways, how can you bring about those kind of enliven those three elements of faith in your family experiences? So that's a very more metaphorical or abstract view of what you can do. If you're looking for a resource, then that with practices that you can just immediately kind of jump into, I highly recommend Tracy Smith's book, Seamless Faith. I think it came out last year. It's Tracy with an I, Tracy Smith, Seamless Faith. And she's a minister and a parent in Texas who has just put together also a book with different practices of faith and almost like family liturgies that families can engage with together. So if you're looking like for a great gift for families or something like that in your congregation, that would kind of be my go-to resource, because it's just makes it seem like it really isn't as difficult as we think it is. So.
Other questions?
I'd also really be interested in hearing if what you guys are doing to kind of rethink this stuff in your own context. I feel like when we get people, even in a digital space together like this, there's often a great like cross-pollination of ideas. And I just made a word. Pollinization's not a word. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, we just got through a period of time of trying to find Sunday school teachers, and this was kind of my first go with it, being kind of new, and it seemed to be a pretty exhausting and annoying process, just finding enough people and then trying to see if they could do more than one Sunday a month, and the revolving door and all of these issues. And so I'm at this point where I've just kind of gone through this for the first time and thinking about next year and years ahead of wanting to rethink how we do that, if we can make that a better process, and how do we also do that in such a way that we keep in mind the children that are showing up and looking to build relationships and have meaningful relationships with the adults that teach them on Sundays and throughout the week. So I don't know. Do you have any thoughts or ideas about how to go about doing that in a more sustainable way?
Yeah. Well, I think from my experience in the Mennonite churches that I've been involved with, is there's tends to be this tradition in some Anabaptist churches where there's like a worship service for everyone and then Sunday school for everyone after. I think if your church does that, then you already are in a good spot, because I feel like there's more creative. It's just kind of to me, a better spot to engage in creative ideas, because there's this sense that young people are supposed to be in worship, and Sunday school is not just for young people. So I know a couple churches that have done different things. One has done all ages Sunday school. So instead of so this is a church that would have Sunday school as a separate time from worship. And what they have done is, instead of saying all, this age group is in this group and this age group is in this class, they have done it based on what some people call affinity groups. So essentially, this is the topic or the spiritual practice. Like, instead of talking, they might just, instead of even more like a classroom style, they might do something more interactive. And then people of all ages kind of gather around that practice or that idea. So the basis of Sunday school then kind of changes from this, the adult teaches the child, to we learn together. And that's something that I think some people have to really work, some congregations really have to work at. I think if you're interested in trying something like that, then I think that an important piece is to sit down with adults that you think are kind of your allies in that process, and talk to them about the importance of being intentional about what that means to have young people in their Sunday school classes with them. Because I can imagine it going awry if it's just, okay, well, we'll just get people in the same room together. The adults might feel disengaged and like the conversation's too kiddie, or they might take the conversation on themselves, and the children and youth might just kind of be left on the sideline. So it takes some intentionality. I also know churches who have kind of addressed the struggles of Sunday school by just canning Sunday school altogether. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that that's a quite appropriate response in some contexts, is just to say, we're sick of the trying to make this system work that isn't working for us anymore, and let's do something else. And so churches are then thinking, when they do that, they think, well, how do we get young people involved in our services? Because if we're honest, I think our worship services aren't made for adults, or are made for adults. They're not really made for teens and kids. And what that means then is we have to find ways of making our services and what the practices that we do more experiential. So one church I know does, they have an art table at the back, and at any time in the service, people who are more artistically minded or want to do something more physical or more creative, they can go, and there are art supplies that they can they can color or draw or paint or whatever it is, as a way of that doesn't take away from the experience of worship. For a lot of people, it enriches it. And I think some churches that are doing that are actually opening it up to people of all ages. So, some people have said we have an interactive worship space at the back of the church for kids, and I would say, well, why is it just for kids? I would really like to go there too. And it kind of allows us to think about formation in a way that goes beyond kind of Sunday school. So I know it doesn't quite answer your question, but I hope it kind of gives some ideas of how some people have kind of had similar questions and responded to them. I think the issue of Sunday school is, I think, one of the biggest challenges facing congregations right now. And for a lot of people, in a lot of contexts, I think that the challenge is actually not to think, how do we do Sunday school better, but it might actually be, what do we do instead of Sunday school? How do we rethink what we're doing? Because Sunday school isn't the reason that we're doing it. The reason that we engage with young people is to help them be followers of Jesus. In some contexts, that means Sunday school. As things change in our world around us, that certainly means, I think, Sunday school is kind of up for grabs.
And
especially because, like, oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I noticed that we're a couple minutes after, so we do need to wrap up here in a little bit, but it's been wonderful, and I will let you finish. I just wanted to say, though, I think sometimes we can get quote away with a lot of these new ideas and engaging our imaginations in sort of a more anxious free way if we propose these things to our congregation in terms of an experiment. We're just going to experiment here, for a certain period of time. It's not like we're just throwing everything out, just canning Sunday school forever. It's like, we're going to try this just experiment to see what happens, see what we learn with and from one another. It's always a good way to approach things.
Yeah, and not to just, I think that the thing to do is, in whatever we're kind of wanting to try out and wanting to experiment with, is to do it gradually. And if any of you are big fans of Mythbusters, you might know that their motto is "failure is always an option." And I think that that's a good motto that we can have with children and youth ministry as well. If we're just willing to try things and not say, this is the way it's going to be for the next 3 years, but just, well, what if we just try this once and see what happens?
And failure also, I think, is our best teacher too. What do we learn from that? So
definitely.
Thank you so much, Dave, for engaging us. I think this is a really helpful conversation, and it definitely, for me, got a lot of ideas generating, and it's just, I think we're at an exciting time right now in our churches if we are able to step outside of the box and and allow ourselves to try something new. So many thanks for you for coming and joining us, and for the rest of you, thank you all for coming and being a part of this conversation. We can keep the conversation going on the forum discussions, which is on the website, or you can engage the Facebook page as well, which is Mennonite Church USA Youth Workers Facebook page. So blessings to each of you, and yes, Dave, blessings to you as you continue to finish up your work at the university, and thanks all for taking a little bit of time out of your day. I've been enriched. Hope you have too. So until next time, blessings. Thanks so much.
Thanks.